Here we go.
Hopefully it works.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Thanks for coming. I think tonight's Tuesday, right? And y'all are here for property tax appeals type stuff. And I wonder, man, y'all must really want to appeal your taxes to come to this thing. And so glad you're here. Grateful for all the time that you're going to give to us. So Ryan is going to get us through a whole program of what he does. He does this all the time.
Yeah.
He is an attorney, correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
It's the real deal and helps people all the time. They have a business, and so he'll tell you a little bit about that. Before we get started, I wanted to introduce our team. For those of you that don't know, hello, come on in. I'm Aaron, and that's my wife, Liz. And then, why don't y'all introduce yourselves real quick?
I'm Loretta Malone.
Loretta's on our team. She's an agent, and she's got a handful of things under contract this weekend.
I'm Melissa Curd. I'm also an agent. I'm on the team for a little over 2 years.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, she's our original agent, the very first one. And then Emily does an assembly of all kinds of things for us. It keeps us on the rails. So that's it, and I'm grateful you're here. I'm going to hand it over to Ryan so that he can do the presentation. Anything I missed, honey?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you. All right, I'm not wearing a mic, so y'all can all hear me. Small room, should all work out. So thank you for the introduction. My name's Ryan Cohen. I do have a company that protests appraised values only, Protest Tax LLC, protesttax.com. I'll have all my information at the end as well, so if you don't need to write it down now, no worries. I've got a few slides. I don't want to bore y'all with a slideshow, so I'll run through this as quickly as we can. We'll talk about everything in here, but if you have any questions, I will say you can ask them, but if you want to save them to the end, what I've learned is the biggest benefit of being here is having me here with you, and if you have any questions about your property in particular, we can spend some time to go over that. But I'll rush through that. I know it's already 6:30, so let's get to it. Okay, so a little bit about myself first. From San Antonio, I went to Clark High School. I graduated from UTSA, and then I graduated law school from Texas A&M. Anybody know where Texas A&M Law School's at? Fort Worth, not in College Station. So it's in Fort Worth. I have a practice here in San Antonio. I am an investor in the new San Antonio Missions baseball team. So if anybody here wants to go to a game, 2 tickets on me, just let me know. Last year we protested over $1.5 billion in appraised value throughout Texas. I am located in San Antonio, so I will say Bexar County is about 80% of the properties that I represent. But in Kendall County, we had, I think, 75 protests last year, and we have 55 different counties that we're in. So it's a very full-time gig for me right now, and this year it's been just as busy than ever. So I'll make one disclaimer. Although I'm an attorney, everything I say today can be found in the Texas Constitution, the property code, the tax code, or from the comptroller's office. So this is not legal advice. Everything I say here, we can find somewhere, not from me. Okay, so today what we're gonna talk about, real quick, we're gonna talk about property taxes, of course. I'm gonna introduce property taxes and just go over the calendar phase that the appraisal district likes to use. We'll briefly touch on exemptions. I know exemptions kind of go hand in hand with what we're talking about. So we will talk about that briefly, but today's class is mostly focused on protesting the appraised values. And then we'll talk about the appraisal methods. How is the district actually appraising my property? Then we're gonna get into the nuts and bolts of how to file a protest, what to expect, the protest timeline, and then how to prepare for your protest as well, what kind of evidence we can be helpful, and then how my firm can help you, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So we'll probably cover everything you can think of. If not, we'll get to it. So real quick, introduction on property tax. And I don't want to make this like a lecture, so I'm going to run through this, okay? Why are property taxes so high in Texas? Well, let me backtrack. How many of y'all have filed a protest before? You protested y'all's appraised values. Okay, great. So there's a few of y'all that have not raised your hands, and you're like, what is this? No idea. What did I get in the mail? We're going to answer your question. Okay, so why do we get this notice of appraised value? Why are property taxes so high in Texas? Well, Texas has no state property tax and no income tax, right? When I say no state property tax, those line items on your tax bill it says City of Bernie or Kendall County, whatever it might be. It doesn't say State of Texas, right? So the State of Texas is not charging you property taxes, and they don't charge you income tax. So how do we pay for everything like the roads, the school district, the police, the fire? Everything comes from property taxes, or so it seems. And so because of that, the tax law requires that all values be uniform and equal. That's kind of the underlying theme, and that's what we do at a protest. We want to make sure that you are paying your fair share of property taxes. And so to do that, we got to make sure everything is equal and uniform. That's the goal. Here's the calendar phase, just that the district kind of likes to present. The first half, they're broken down really into quarters of the year. The first quarter of the year is what they call the appraisal phase. That is when the appraisal district is going out in the field, looking at any new buildings that are made, and putting a value to your property, right? There's a couple key dates that we'll target, but first they say, okay, what is your property worth? Here's the appraisal phase. And then the equalization phase is the second part. That's when we go to the protest hearings and we try to make sure that you're paying your equal fair share, right? And then after we protest, then the property values are assessed, and then tax bills are collected at the end of the year. So it's kind of a backwards calendar. Right now, we are trying to determine what your value is going to be. So the tax bill at the end of the year is less than it would be if you don't protest, right? So just want to come talk about a few key dates. January 1st, that's the date that the district is required to appraise your property, and that's a very important date. So if you're in the middle of constructing a new home, for example, and on January 1st, your property is 80% complete. You've got some drywall, but it's not 100% complete. Well, the district may go out in February or March and think that it's 100% complete, so they're gonna put a value on your property. Well, you wanna make sure to let them know on January 1st, it was really 80% complete, so that could help, right? That could bring 20% off your value right then and there. So January 1st is a key date. The other key date is May 15th. That's the normal protest deadline throughout Texas, right? So the normal protest deadline is May 15th, but it is also 30 days after you get your notice of appraised value, whichever one is later. Kendall County just released their notices of appraised value, so their protest deadline is not May 15th, I believe it's May 31st, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so that means their notices went out after April 15th, right? And so May 15th is an important date, and that's because there's a protest deadline every year that you've got to make sure you don't miss. So besides January 1st and May 15th, after you file your protest, you'll be conducting hearings at the appraisal district, usually June, July, August. They want to get your values certified by October, just because that's when they like to send tax bills, right? So they can't send a tax bill unless they know what your values are. So, and then, they'll send your tax bills in October, and they're usually due by January 31st of the following year. So I'll just ask any questions about the calendar phase. Just kind of wanted to make sure we understand the timeline of why we're getting the notice early in the year and why the tax bills come out at the end of the year. And then let's talk quickly about exemptions. So exemptions are a tool that lower your property tax bill. If y'all are just moved to Texas or you just bought a house, you want to make sure that you have at least the first one, which is a homestead exemption. It's a very important exemption that you can qualify for if you claim the property as your personal residence. It's free to file, so if you do buy a property, you'll probably get a bunch of solicitations saying, we'll file your protest for $200, or not your protest, your homestead application for a couple $100. Don't buy into it. It's free to file, and you can get those forms at the appraisal district, and you can follow them year round. And so as soon as you live in the property, you qualify for that homestead application. You just got to make sure that your driver's license or government ID matches the address that you're applying for. You're going to have to submit that with it. Besides the homestead, the other common exemptions are the over 65 homestead. So if you are homestead but you're also over the age of 65, or your spouses, you could qualify for that exemption. And then the disability homestead and then disabled veteran homestead, either a full or a partial. We are in Military City, USA, San Antonio, so there's a lot of individuals that qualify for a disabled veteran homestead. There are certain requirements that are needed to prove a DV or a disability exemption. I would ask that you please speak to the appraisal district directly for any questions regarding exemptions. Those rules change all the time. As y'all probably know, we did vote in November to increase the homestead exemption amount, as well as cap non-homestead exempt properties. That being said, those rules change, but what doesn't change is you gotta make sure you have a homestead property, or homestead exemption on file if it is your homestead. If you wanna know, you think you did it, but you're not sure, the appraisal district usually will show the homestead on your property, or it may even be on your notice of appraised value. So that's all I really want to talk about exemptions. I'll bring in the homestead one more time because it does affect your assessed value. But besides that, if you have any questions regarding homesteads in particular, I know there's a huge topic on it. We can talk about it at the end as well. So let's talk about the appraisal district, why you're here, right? The appraisal district. Great. They send these notices of appraised values that you got, and they send those, they're supposed to send them by April 1st, but sometimes they send them out late. And what their whole job is, as you can imagine, the appraisal district, their job is to appraise property. And taxable property has to be appraised as of January 1st. I mentioned that before, it's a very important date. January 1st is a very key date. And so what is, so the district is required to appraise your property at market value. That's the key term. What is market value? Market value is the price that a property would transfer for cash or cash equivalents under a prevailing market if it's exposed to the open market. So if it's an MLS sale, right? If you have access to the MLS and you see that this home was sold on the open market, that's considered a market transaction. A lot of the times, especially recently, there's cash for homes, there's a lot of off-market sales. And so my argument, especially when I have investors that are buying, cheap homes, is, that's still considered a market transaction because they had a solicitation, they had an offer, they had a buyer. But that's the goal, is to make sure that you are being appraised at market value as of January 1st. And those are just the definitions of what market value is. So how does the district appraise your property at market value? Well, one of three appraisal methods, either the sales, which is the market approach, the income approach, or the cost approach. For single family homes, we're gonna focus on the market approach, which is what are homes selling for in your neighborhood? And that's the kind of data that the district uses to place a value on your property. If it's not a single family home and it's a commercial property, it's an apartment or it's any sort of income producing property, that's when that appraisal district will place that on an income approach, right? And then if it's a cost approach, that doesn't fit in any of the two categories, or if you just built a property, you can show what it costs to build it, that is considered market value, right? What is the cost of the property? I deal with all three. I do have commercial clients that those properties are based on an income approach, and so I'll have to ask for financials, NOI, T12s or rent rolls if it's an apartment complex. And so depending on what type of property it is, that determines how the district is appraising your property. But if you're here worried about your single family home, just know that they are appraising that on a market approach, which is what are the sales in the area. Okay, we're halfway through already. Okay, so this is a notice of appraised value that the district sent to my office for one of my clients here in Kendall County. So I just got this the other day, and I just want to go over this with you so we can look at it, because if you get this for the first time, you may have no idea what this is. So this is the notice of appraised value for Kendall County. I think it looked a little different last year, but let's just go over some key dates. It has what your last year value is, and then it has what your proposed 2024 market value is. And so for proposed, well, it's proposed because that's what they're saying they're going to place it. If you file a protest, clearly that could change. This notice of appraised value is a little misleading, I will say, because there is a line that says total market value. Do y'all brought y'all's notices just in case? Okay, so you see that line that says total market value. That is actually the appraised value of the property, all right? There is a line that says appraised value, but that should really say assessed value, okay? The district in Bexar County also has this problem, and I keep asking them to change it because it is misleading, okay? So the total market value line is the appraised value. That is the value that the district is placing on your property. This line that says appraised value, again, should really say assessed value, and that may be different than your market value if you have exemptions on the property, right? Especially a homestead. And I know we're going to bring back exemptions here, but it's important to understand that this exemption, it says exemptions right here, it says HS. That means this property, my client has a homestead exemption on his property, okay? And what the homestead exemption does, besides give you $100,000 off of your market value as it applies to the district of the school district, is one thing very important recently, is that it creates a homestead cap, which limits the increase in assessed value to no more than 10% from the previous year, right? So you probably heard, I thought they can't raise my value by more than 10%. Well, that's wrong. The appraised value can increase your value by 1,000%. They can place it from $500,000 one year to $1 million the next year. But if it's your homestead property, the assessed value cannot go up by more than 10%. So, looking at my client's property this year, last year his market value, aka appraised value, was $478,000, and it only went up to $486,000. It only increased by $8,000 in appraised value. But his assessed value went from $424,940 to $467,434. And guess what? That is exactly 10% more than the previous number, right? So this year, my client is being initially appraised at $486, but he's only being assessed at $467. So the difference between those two numbers, what you're being appraised at versus what you're actually getting taxed on, that's called your homestead cap, right? So my client has a homestead cap of almost $20,000, which is just saving him a little bit, right? So at a protest hearing, I'm not gonna be able to save my client any money unless I get his market value, aka appraised value, below what he's already being assessed at, right? And what had happened is in 2022, when values jumped up 40% like crazy, you were being capped at that 10% increase. Well, that's not too long ago now, but it's been 3 years. So that 10% has kind of been finally catching up. And eventually, it's not gonna go up 10% every year. I mean, this year it only went up 8,000, maybe 1%, right? 2%. So maybe next year or the year afterwards, your homestead caps will go away because it's not gonna increase 10% every single year. Does that make sense? Okay, it's a little bit of numbers, but I brought this just so it's pretty clear that there is a difference between market appraised value versus assessed value. So it's important to know that, and when you go to a protest, if your market value is $1 million, but you're a 486, well, guess what? When you go to the protest, the value that you're starting with to get lowered is the $1 million. That's the appraised value that you're trying to get down. So that may determine whether or not you want to go to the protest. I say yes, protest either way. Even if your homestead cap is $500,000, right? You still want to be able to file a protest just to represent yourself and protect your rights as a property owner. Any questions regarding homestead caps or what your notice of appraised values may look like? If you do, you don't ask right now, don't worry, I'll be here afterwards and we can talk about it in particular. But that's the notice of appraised value, right? And then on the back side is the notice of protest form, right? It may be on the back side or maybe a separate piece of paper. But this is the notice of appraised value by Kendall, and they send this with that notice of appraised value, right? So they send you the notice of appraised value, and then they send you this notice of protest form. And so if you are going to file it yourself, I would encourage you to use the form that the district gave you. You can use this form, you don't have to. You just have to make sure that you provide notice to the district that you are filing a protest. When I send my notice of protest to, let's say, Cohen County, I don't make a form like this for every single property. I send a nice letter saying, "Dear Cohen Appraisal District, I'm protesting the attached list. Here you go." And I send it to them, and I'm done, right? Makes it easy on my part. They appreciate it because it helps them out. But if you just have one property, this is already filled in. The district may have put the information in already on your form as well. This is filled in with my information because I'm this property's agent, so they send it to my office, so that part is filled in. But a few key things that I want to talk about. You'll complete section 1, you'll put your information. If the property is different than the above, your home address, your mailing address, then you'll list that in section 2. The appraisal district account number is optional, but it's important, it's good to include it on there. It's usually that bold 6-digit number that you have at the top. And then section 3, reasons for protest. Very, very important. The first box, incorrect appraised market and or value is unequal compared with other properties. That is the box you want to check off. If you don't check that box, you're not gonna be able to argue anything at your protest hearing. They used to have this in two separate boxes. They used to say incorrect appraised value and then value unequal with others. And you had to check off both boxes, but they've learned over the years, let's just combine that because that is the only reason really you're gonna file a protest. There are other reasons, if they denied an exemption, if they changed the use of the land, if the owner's name is incorrect. But for purposes of trying to reduce your appraised value, you're gonna wanna select that first option, which is the incorrect market or appraised value. In section 4, you can provide facts about your property if you want them to consider that. I don't put anything there, this is just to give them notice, and then I'll provide my evidence when we're at the hearing. So, if you just bought the property for less than what they're appraising it at, you may just want to include it there, just bought it for $400,000, and that may be something you want to include. But what do you think your property's value is? Optional. I don't include that in my notice of protest. I don't tell them what I want my value is because they may say, oh, damn, I thought I was gonna give you $300,000, you say 400, sure, we'll go with your 400. So I'll leave that optional, I'll leave it blank. Section 5 is the hearing type. We'll talk about the hearings, but this is if you go to a formal hearing. And I will say, because we're at this point, I will just bring this up. The hearing that they're asking for here is about your formal hearing. You will get an opportunity to speak informally with an appraiser one-on-one. That's not what section 5 is. This is saying, if after your informal hearing, if you can't come to an agreement and you are scheduled for a formal hearing, how do you want that hearing to be? You want it to be in person? You'll check off that box. I suggest you do it in person, it's better. Do you want a single panel or a regular panel? A regular panel is usually better. What that means is instead of 3 A or B members, you can have 1. That is your option, to have 1 or 3. It doesn't really matter. When I do this a lot, I am at the appraisal district for formal hearings every single day. And if I know who the single panel member is, and he's my buddy, I may say, you know what, I'll take a single panel member today because we can usually get things done pretty quickly. And then right here, the first line, do you request an informal conference with the appraisal office before the protest hearing? That's what I was talking about, the informal hearing, right? Check yes, that is key. What that means is that's gonna give you the opportunity to speak with an appraiser one-on-one prior to going to a formal hearing. And I'm an attorney, and when we file a lawsuit, I don't file lawsuits, I was in the commercial litigation world, but when I was an associate filing lawsuits, 99% of the time, you settle the case, right? So 99% of the time, if you attend an informal hearing, you'll settle your hearing at that time, and you won't proceed to a formal hearing. So I always say, yes, you do want an informal conference with the district. That's important, and usually you can get stuff done at that time. Section 6, A or B hearing notices. I request my notice to be delivered. You can put email if you want, or however, I would just make sure you check something off there because you want them to be able to prove that they sent you notice. Because if you say, hey, I'm waiting for my hearing date, I never got it, well, we sent it to you by blah, blah, blah. Well, on my notice of protest form, I said that you needed to send it by first class mail or by email. I don't have it, right? So that's helpful. They deal with a lot of protests, so just make sure you check off one of those options. And then you'll sign it. You can check off the property owner and sign it there and submit your notice of protest form. Very important, you need to turn this in before the protest deadline, right? And on that notice of protest, on the very bottom says deadline for filing protest, May 31st, 2024. That's this year. Next year it could change. Remember, it's May 15th or 30 days after those notices go out. This notice didn't go out until April 26th. They gave you a little extra cushion there, but the deadline for this year is May 31st. In Bexar County, it's May 15th. And in surrounding counties, it varies. Bandera, we're still waiting for those notices, so usually that hearing date probably won't be, or the deadline won't be until June. So, this was in there, in between there, I already talked about this, it just needs to be in writing. You can use that form, but again, May 15th or 30 days after the date the appraisal district sends those notices. So that is the Kendall County notice of protest. And then again, the action subject to protest, which was section 3, I believe, you need to check off incorrect appraisal market value. That's the most important check mark you can make there. We don't protest anything except for that. If for some reason, randomly, the district decides to remove your homestead exemption, they'll send you a letter saying, hey, we removed your homestead exemption. You have 30 days to protest. And so that's something that usually comes at a random time. And it's usually at the fault of the district. They just accidentally removed it for one reason or the other. So I know I kind of briefly mentioned this, but after you file your protest, you should be scheduled for the informal hearing, right? The informal is the one-on-one with the appraiser. That's when you can present your evidence and you agree to a value. If you can agree at that time, you'll sign a settlement and waiver, and then you're done, right? You got your new value for this year, all is well. If you cannot come to a settlement agreement, you and the appraiser are trying to work it out, he says a number, y'all aren't agreeing, well, that's when you'll say, okay, we try to settle, we're gonna go to a formal hearing. Sometimes they'll schedule it 2 weeks afterwards. They usually have to give you notice. Or what they'll do is they'll say, which Kendall might do, is here's your formal hearing notice. If you want to speak with an appraiser, show up 30 minutes early. Sometimes the district will do that, and then it's like, okay, if we don't settle, I'm going down the hallway and I'm about to attend my formal hearing. Formal hearings, not scary. This is what I wear. I'm not gonna wear a suit and tie. It's literally, it's small, it depends what county you're in, but it's, instead of you and the appraiser working together one-on-one to come to an agreement, now it's you versus the appraiser, and there's 3 members of your community, not hired by the appraisal district. They may seem like it, but they are supposed to be just normal neighbors, and you present your case, the district will present their case, you'll have a rebuttal, they'll have a rebuttal, and then the appraisal review board members will make a determination of value, right? So, we go to formal hearings only if we really have to. If I have really strong evidence and for some reason the district is not gonna agree with me informally, you know, sometimes his hands are tied, right? So one reason or the other, if you have to go to a formal hearing, not a big deal, we can do that. If you go to a formal hearing and then the board members make a determination of value, that gives you additional rights. You can then appeal their decision by either filing for a request for arbitration or by suing them in the district court. There are law firms or other big firms that only do this sort of thing, right? They don't care about the informal and the formal hearing. They just file lawsuits, right? I don't do that. I'm an attorney, but I don't file lawsuits. I only represent clients with the informal and the formal hearing. If for some reason you're not happy with the results at your formal hearing, then I can give you a referral for an attorney that will charge you a retainer fee plus $250 an hour, and it's probably not gonna be worth it, right? If you have a larger commercial property and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in difference, then that may be worth filing a lawsuit for it. But if you're gonna argue over a $20,000, $30,000 difference in appraised value, which really only equals maybe $500-600, probably not worth it. So you file your notice, now you need to prepare for your hearings. I've only got a few more slides, so we're almost done. So for residential properties like yourself, what do you bring to the hearings? Well, for residential, you do want sales data because they are basing it off of a market approach. So you want to show, hey, why are you using all of the high sales in the neighborhood? What about these low sales? You know, what about my neighbor's property you just sold for less than what you're appraising it at mine, right? So you want to be able to provide that sales data, and that's where this group of agents can come in and provide that for you. If you are going to do it yourself, you may want to get either a CMA or some sales data information that they can provide to you so you can prepare that for your hearing. Which brings to my point, when you do file your notice, there's probably something on there where you can request the district's evidence, and you want to make sure you do that, right? So you want to make sure you see the district's evidence. You want to see what homes they're using for their sales data, and make sure that they're not using homes that are in the next neighborhood that has the $1 million homes when you're not in that neighborhood, right? So you want to look at their sales data. You want to be able to provide your sales data as well. You don't want to bring sales that happened in 2022, right? You want to be as close to January 1st as you can. Usually the rule of thumb is anything in the prior year plus the first quarter of this year. So for 2024 protest purposes, we are going to have evidence that has sales from all of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024. Also, for residential properties, personal evidence is important, right? The whole point of protesting your appraised value is saying, hey, appraisal district, you're appraising my value too high, it should be lower. Well, look at these photos of my property. Look at all these cracks on the interior and the exterior of my house. I have water damage. I have flooding when it rains. I have all of these issues wrong with my property. And they don't know this, right? They don't know what your property is, and that's why it's important to provide detailed personal photos, personal evidence as well. If you have a quote for any big ticket items, roof, electrical, plumbing, or an invoice that you just paid, that's the type of evidence that you're going to want to bring at these hearings, right? For commercial properties, again, if it's based on an income approach, you're going to want to be able to show the rent rolls, the T12s, the vacancy, stuff like that. If you have any questions about commercial, usually just ask at that point. So what is 35%? Let's say you don't have a homestead exemption, it's a rental property or whatever, and your tax rate is 2.5%. So that means every 10,000 you reduce in appraised value, you save $250, right? 10,000 times 2.5% is $250. I think Kendall County tax rate is about 2%, give or take. Depends on if you have a MUD, and it could be more than 2.5%. But just kind of keep in mind, okay, what am I doing? How much is that really saving me? Okay, if the tax rate's 2%, every 10,000 is $200, right? So if I reduce your value by 10,000, you save $250 before taxes, my 35% fee would come out to $87 or so, right? So it's only based if we're successful at reducing your appraised value. But if you decide to protest, I encourage you to do so. Just make sure you show up on time. Don't get emotional, right? They want to work with you. They want to see that evidence that we talked about. They're going to give you something, hopefully. Some districts are definitely more challenging than the others. I will say stay out of Atascosa County. Not friendly there. But Kendall County is great. I know we're on Instagram Live, so I don't know if there's any appraisers right now. But I've worked with the appraisers for the last couple of years. Same appraiser in Kendall County, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. She's great to work with. So it's business, it's relationships, right? So I'm at the appraisal district every year. I build a relationship with them. They're nice. They're going to work with you. I will say Kendall County is a little bit turbulent. They've had quite a few chief appraisers over the last several years. They can't seem to stick to it. Maybe their systems are a little outdated. So I know when we started protest last year, they were still finishing up from the year before. So I imagine when protest hearings start to begin next month, they're going to be wrapping up what they did in 2023. They're a little bit behind. I will say Kendall County is probably a very hot market right now. So a lot of people are moving in Kendall County, so they probably have record number of protests that are filed every year. So they're working as best as they can. Debbie, you hear that? Okay, cool. Again, this is my info. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. But besides that, I want to open it up to a Q&A. So hopefully, it didn't take too long. Okay, cool. So hopefully you learned a lot. Again, if you have any questions regarding protests, don't look at my desktop, it's very dirty. So I'll leave it I'll play it from the current side. All right, cool. Any questions at all? Yes.
When you're bringing evidence, you would want, like, let's say I need a new roof and it's going to cost me, I don't know, $30,000.
Yeah.
And would it be probably more beneficial for me not to do my roof and to bring my quote versus bringing my invoice that I just paid and improved my property?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, we get that all the time. Well, why did they, I don't want to show them that I did all of these things to my home because then they just may jack it up. Well, in the world of protest, providing that type of evidence just means that they may have been overappraising your value a little bit to begin with. So they'll usually give you maybe 50 cents on the dollar. If you just replace it, they're going to say, you know what, maybe on January 1st when you needed that remodel, you needed that roof replacement. Because what they're doing is they're basing your home compared to homes that have recently sold. And a lot of those times the sold properties are remodeled. They're really nice. And so your point is, all these homes that sold recently, well, my home isn't looking as nice as that. Even if you don't have any issues with your property, just show no updates. You can go around your property and take 10 photos, even a brand new home where wood is chipping, there may be a crack. You can provide some photos that kind of look that it could help. But to answer your question, I get that question a lot. It doesn't hurt you to show that you have improved your property. Usually they'll give you 50 cents on the dollar. So if you have multiple quotes, bring your highest and best quote that you got. And I will say, if you pull any permits for your property, the district will probably know that as well. So don't try to hide anything from them. I had a client who built a pool house and a pool, and the district didn't pick it up for 3 years, right? That should have been on the property. Well, guess what? They sent him a tax bill for his back taxes for the improvement that they didn't have for 3 years, plus penalties and interest, right? So just going to a protest just to make sure that the district has your characteristics of your property correct is also very important. Some other things I want to mention that I didn't get to say is I do work with a nonprofit called My City is My Home. Based in San Antonio, we provide pro bono protests for hundreds of properties every year if they are usually low income or if their appraised value is less than $200,000. If you want to learn more about that, or somebody that may qualify for a free protest, I encourage you to check out mycityismyhome.com. Last year, so how the way it works is if you sign up through them but you don't qualify for a free protest, half of whatever fee we make from your protest goes as a donation to the nonprofit. So last year we were able to donate over $20,000, which is great. And then second thing, more this year than last year, is some properties actually rolled over, which means that they're the same value from last year as they are to this year, right? And so for those properties that you say, my value is the same, I don't want to protest it. Well, you still want to protest, because that 10% cap rule for the homestead, that can also roll 10% the following year. It's 10% every year that they reappraise it, right? So if you don't reappraise it, then next year, if you don't have a homestead cap, it could go up 20%, right? So it's 10% that every year that they reappraise the property. So if you're gonna just agree to whatever value they were gonna place on it, still file a protest and just agree to the no change in value, because that's considered a reappraisal, and then that 10% cap stays there. So something we see more this year than last year is some properties have rolled over in value. One more tidbit with Kendall County, which I've noticed, is if you go to a formal hearing, a lot of the times they will roll your value over. So it's more advantageous to get a value at a formal hearing than an informal hearing, especially in Kendall County. They can change that every year. They're not required to. But what I've noticed with my clients is if I attended their formal hearing and the appraisal review board made a determination of value, they'll usually keep that value for at least 1 more year. They're only required to reappraise values every 3 years. It just seems with the way that the market's been going is they are reappraising every single year. Any other questions? Yes?
I actually have 4.
Okay, yeah. Good, let's go.
I overheard Liz saying that there's new rules or whatnot that you have to refile your homestead exemption.
No, you only have to file that one time.
Is that right?
So they sent out the notices
Yes,
this year.
correct.
That you have to, are they calling it reapply? Is that what they're calling it?
Is it Kendall County that's doing that? Okay, so Kendall
Like
County.
you had to do it, or else your homestead exemption wasn't good, and you had to
Really?
provide proof, like through like a utility bill or something like that, to prove
I
that that
don't
was your
doubt
homestead.
Okay, I'm gonna say I don't doubt it with Kendall County, because like I said, they are so far behind on the times that they're still running on old operating systems, and it's a pain in the ass, okay? So in Bexar County, when you apply for a homestead exemption, they put what your birth date is. And you qualify for the over 65 exemption the year you turn 65. So if you don't turn 65 until the end of the year, December 31st, guess what? You're still gonna get the over 65 exemption that full year. So with Bexar County, when they plug in your homestead application and put in your date of birth, their computers will automatically pick up the year you turn 65. Kendall, no, they don't do that, right? So if you have an over 65 exemption, or you're over 65 and you think that the district would automatically apply it, not in Kendall County. You gotta make sure that they do apply that 65 exemption. So that rumor, or whatever it might be, that Kendall is asking you to resubmit your homestead.
I thought it was a Texas-wide thing though.
No, you only have to apply for a homestead one time.
But I thought this was something new. I'd have to go back and read.
Yeah, well, in November, we voted to increase the homestead exemption amounts.
Right,
So from 40,000 to 100,000, and then to 110,000 for seniors.
right.
We also voted in the same amendment to reduce the school district tax rates by 0.1, 10 cents out of the dollar, whatever that equals. Some school districts gave even more of a discount, and some of those taxing entities that make up the tax rate, like the healthcare system, the water system, they also opted in to give exemptions as well. But as far as reapplying for a homestead exemption, no, I'm not aware of that.
I think, what was it, Aaron, every 5 years? Is that what they were saying?
Yeah.
I think it's every 5 years. It was something new this year. It's the first time I'd ever seen
Oh,
it
really?
in the mail. And I know other people got it too, because of course, you see
Yeah, I
people
will
talking
say-
about it on like Facebook and, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
all the
maybe,
places.
I haven't heard of it. I will say if it has something to do with Kendall County specifically, I
Yeah.
would probably believe it. But from my understanding, no, you only have to apply one time, and then it should be on there every single year afterwards. So, and you'll get notified if they take it off. So, and if you decide to put it in a trust, right, you can do that. A homestead can be in a trust. It cannot be in an LLC. Companies cannot have homesteads. But if you want to put it in a trust, that's not gonna change the homestead. You'll still be able to have that homestead. It's if you still own the property, that cap will not go away at all. So, yeah. Question number 2?
Are there any codified obligations that the appraisal district has to provide you the data, comp data or whatnot?
Yeah,
And the reason why I asked this question is I had a considerable amount of trouble getting
Yeah.
this from them whenever
It should be here.
my last protest.
So I'm looking for it. I know on the Bear County notice of protest form, it's on here, and I'm looking for it right now. But usually it says request evidence, right?
And I did check this.
Yeah, so the one thing I will say, if you request the evidence and the district does not provide it to you at least 48 hours prior to your protest hearing, you can object to their use. And I've had to do that one time. I don't like to burn bridges, but I requested the evidence multiple times. They never gave it to me. And so when I showed up to my hearing, right before the appraiser even started talking, I say, I object to any testimony by the appraiser. He did not provide me the evidence in time. And guess what? I got to talk, and they didn't. And I did pretty good. So,
You can do that in writing, like,
yeah, it's usually there's a checkbox here, but you can just put it. I don't even know where they would put it. Maybe provide facts. You could put please provide evidence. There may be something on here. I just got these in the mail this past week, and I know for at least Bear County's notice of protest, it's in red. It says evidence request. Check here, right? So you want to make sure that you do check the box to request evidence.
It's up toward the top.
It is toward the top.
In red on mine, I have a Bear County property.
Oh, you see on Bear County, yeah, say exactly. So if it's on Bear County, it says evidence requested, you check that box. Kendall County, yeah. You could just email them, say, I request my evidence in writing, send it to their customer service email address. Just show proof that you requested it on there. Even include it on the lines right here, say, please send me evidence. Just make sure you include that. Yeah, so, Mr. Horner, right? Yeah, so on the Bear County one, it says in red, they want you to check off whether or not you have evidence. Also, I'm not sure about Kendall County, but usually you can file a protest electronically if it is your homestead. I'm bashing Kendall right now, I'm sorry. But I don't know if Kendall's systems are up and running to be able to handle that as well. I know for Bear County, you can file it electronically. I always say that's fine to file your protest electronically, but then you'll want to select the option to continue everything by scheduling time to work with an appraiser. If you select the option, at least in Bear County, that you're gonna file electronically and continue everything electronically, it's not very good because they're gonna give you an option to, an offer, you either accept or reject it, and if you reject it, they schedule it for a formal hearing. There's not a lot of negotiation, not a lot of exchange of evidence that way. So we file a protest electronically, but we choose to follow up by meeting with an appraiser. But very, very, very important, you wanna ask for the evidence, whether on this form, anyway. So is there some codified rule that they have to give you anything? Yes, if you request their evidence and they don't give it to you 48 hours prior to a hearing, you can object to the use of their evidence. Yep.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any downside to pleading your case to the panel hearing?
No.
Like, could you, working with the appraisal, you could come to a point which you got your assessed value down, but you don't feel like he's given enough,
So they cannot raise your value at a protest. So just by filing a protest, state district can't say, oh, you know what, maybe we were too low, let's go ahead and jack it up. Can't do that. There's not a downside, because if you don't reduce your appraised value, you're stuck paying whatever they were gonna place on your property anyways. And even if you don't reduce your appraised value below your assessed value because you have a homestead cap, well, it's still important to do so, because next year when they go back up, now you're arguing for that bigger increase from what